to a chorus of voices across this country, both at the local level cessation as it relates to addressing the issues and ills related to tobacco use, particularly for our children. And we have seen tremendous progress over the course of the last few decades, not only in this state, but in this nation. It was just a number of years ago that the former governor of the state of California was acknowledging the success of California's leadership, which is demonstrable in this space, on anti-tobacco advertising and the reduction in use of tobacco-related products. In this state, in the last number of years, that has changed, as has been the case arguably all across the rest of the country. With the advent of these vaping tools and technologies, we have seen a significant increase in now the use and abuse of vaping products, particularly now with these flavored e-liquid products. We estimate over 15,500 of these flavored e-liquid products are available on the market. We've seen a skyrocket increase in the use of these flavored products by our children, and vaping products are now being seen almost ubiquitously, not just in high school campuses, but increasingly in middle school campuses. And as a father of four, this has been an issue that's been brought to the forefront of my consciousness, not because my children per se, but by family members of their friends that are increasingly concerned and anxious about what they're hearing and what they're seeing in schools large and small all across this state. We need to do more. We need to do better. There were efforts in the legislative session to do just that. They fell short, and in the absence of any bills, substantive bills to sign in this space, we believe it is appropriate for us to take executive action. As a consequence, we have advanced an executive order that does a number of specific things, and we can fill in the blanks with the two representatives up on stage in a moment, but here substantively are the key takeaways in terms of our efforts. Number one, we're going to considerably increase our enforcement against counterfeit products and against those that are currently abusing the law and are allowing access to these products to our children. Number two, we're going to significantly review and consider increasing the warning signage, not only in retail establishments, but to broadly consider warning as it relates to potential packaging, which I know is a gray area, but substantively on advertisement more broadly of these products. As Mark Galley mentioned to me as I walk across the hall, it's just an interesting fact that when you see a tobacco product that is advertised, it has large warning label. You see some of these products in the vaping world, there's no warning label. That needs to change, and our executive order will advance the same. We are also pursuing a $20 million, and this is a minimum. I think it will be substantially higher, but we're starting with a $20 million advertising campaign using Proposition 56 monies and using Prop 64, the cannabis dollars. By executive order, I'm afforded the right to make determinations of how those dollars are used. We're going to focus our marketing campaigns targeting this epidemic of vaping in the state of California. That marketing campaign will launch next month. This is a rather weak example of that, and I don't mean that to denigrate the work that was done to put that up on stage, but we are looking and testing a number of advertising campaigns, and we'll be making those very public just in the next few weeks, as I said, in October. We also are reviewing our tax policies. I know there was legislative effort on taxes. I want to see how far we can go administratively. It's an open-ended question of how far we can go, but we're going to push the envelope. Let me be specific. Tobacco products today are taxed at $2.87. I'll back up. Cigarettes are taxed at $2.87. Tobacco products, chewing tobacco, e-cigarettes, other tobacco-related products are not taxed at $2.87. They're taxed, interestingly, at 59.27% of the wholesale cost of the product. Let me break that down. If, for example, and forgive me, Juul, but if you're selling a Juul pod that costs at wholesale $2.50, you would assess a 59.27% tax, which works out, if you're using your calculator, to $1.48, not $2.87, just $1.48. It's interesting that in many cases, these pods hold substantially higher concentrations of nicotine than even traditional tobacco products. Under Proposition 56, this was considered. Under Proposition 56, there is language to consider the content, the density content, oh, you can explain it perhaps more eloquently than myself, that I think warrants an investigation by Nick and his team to see if we can substantially increase the taxes of these products. Again, in the absence of any legislative effort that's successful, we want to see how far we can go in this endeavor. Regardless, the study that we will do, the study that Nick and his team will do, will help advance any legislative efforts into the new year in a way that I think will only encourage more support by the legislature. And final close, I do personally believe, you've never asked, I'm happy to say what I've long said, I do not believe in these flavored tobacco products, and I hope that we will address that issue administratively. It appears, and we're pushing the envelope in this executive order, it appears that, as they say, governor alone is not afforded the right legally to ban those products outright, that we would need legislative support. Again, we're pushing the envelope. We'll see how far we can go, and we're diving deep to explore the limits of this authority vested in me, but I am hopeful that we can find a pathway to do just that, again, in the absence of any legislative push. So that's broadly what we're committing to today. I've got my two experts here to answer any detailed questions, but we're getting serious about this issue, and we're going to drive these issues as far as we can through executive authority.
Nicotine, so how much of this also applies to cannabis? You know, we're still figuring out what's causing the respiratory illnesses, but more of them are from people who have vaped THC products specifically. So what if this applies to cannabis?
Well, and Nick could tell you about two enforcement actions, cannabis related, just over the last few days, over the weekend in Los Angeles. We are aggressively increasing our enforcement actions in that space. Again, I want to remind you of the predicate here. It's not just the president's announcement, though we applauded that announcement. I very specifically did as it relates to his concern in this space. But as you know, we have just since September, up to September 10th, and by the way, we think we had another incident over the weekend, though I'm told I can't say more than that. We're going to get more information soon. But we've had at least one death and at least 63 instances of respiratory illnesses or ailments related to vaping products in this state. And so this is increasingly coming to the fore. But as you suggest, a lot of it is in the cannabis space, not just in the tobacco space. And I see this agnostically, and I think the utilization of the Prop 64 dollars, focusing with Prop 56 dollars in the issue of vaping as it's used for not only cannabis products but also tobacco products, will ultimately advance the goal of addressing both at the same time.
The potential warning labels and advertisements and in stores that sell these things, would that also apply to stores that sell cannabis vaping devices?
All vaping products.
Okay.
Yeah.
Governor, New York and Michigan have already announced bans or intended bans on flavored e-cigarette products. President Trump, as you mentioned, has already talked about having a ban on it. Is California behind on this issue?
No, well, we are. It's the fact is, they should be banned. But as you know, in New York, they requested their agencies to move forward. I'm requesting my agencies to move forward. We're leading. We're one of now just a couple states that are having this conversation. This conversation was anticipated last week. It's been announced today. They've been working hard over the course of the last week to organize their efforts. But we'll seek whatever administrative remedies we can. But we believe that there are some issues related to California's rules and regulations that will require legislative support.
And with the president coming to California tomorrow, what's the general message you wanted to send to him on behalf of all Californians?
I sent out a tweet complimenting his acknowledgement of the concern, and I hope he follows through on it. And I don't mean this in a derogatory way. I don't mean this to diminish what the president said, but often he says things but doesn't do things. So in the absence of him doing something, I want to compliment the governor of Michigan, the governor of New York, and other governors. I imagine many, many more governors will be coming out over the course of the next few weeks, days, weeks, and all those mayors. There are dozens of cities that have already moved aggressively in this space and are looking to ban these flavored e-liquid products, and that's long overdue.
But do you have any comments related specifically to his fundraising efforts coming up tomorrow?
That's a separate topic, and I'll get to those issues in a moment. And you'll have plenty of time at me on that.
Governor, given your concerns about vaping products in the cannabis space specifically, have you considered taking any action against Weed Maps, which is still currently advertising for literally thousands of illegal
You may be
marijuana retailers
familiar
these days?
with the answer, because the answer is yes. And Weed Maps, as you know, I don't mean to look backwards. There was no enforcement action at Weed Maps in the past. I got here. There has been. They voluntarily have agreed to withdraw all unlicensed advertising by December 31st of this year. And that was encouraged, and that is a good thing.
Just to be a little more, I guess, clear on the enforcement bit for illicit cannabis
You guys can come up
products.
on it.
What are we doing that's new in this executive order, if anything, to crack down on people that are illicitly manufacturing? Like, we just saw that big raid in Wisconsin over the weekend. Who knows if that kind of thing is happening in California, but does this executive order do new enforcement on cannabis?
Well, the answer is we've been stepping up our enforcement already. This is not just, again, about cannabis. This is about e-cigarettes. This is about these vaping products that are used both for cannabis and tobacco use. And we will continue to see that made public. This specific executive order allows for the California Department of Tax and Administration to access the information from distributors of where they're distributing their vaping products. That will allow us to have two sets of data, and we'll be able to reference the distribution of those products with the sales of those products at retail, and be able to cross-reference those databases. That's specifically called out in this executive order, and that, I believe, will substantially help your efforts to target enforcement in a way we haven't been able to do in the past. Perhaps, Nick, you can amplify that or correct that.
No, that's absolutely right. And to the cannabis point, as the governor mentioned earlier, just last week there were two major raids in Southern California based on counterfeit vaping products at illegal dispensaries that the Bureau of Cannabis Control, the Department of Consumer Affairs, as well as the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration participated in those raids, which confiscated upwards of $3 million in illegal product, including counterfeit vaping pods, which we suspect were contaminated and not suitable for human consumption.
And Nick, just maybe explain as well in this executive order some more efforts that we're investigating on stamping.
Sure.
And how the stamping process might look if we are successful.
Sure. So cigarettes currently have a stamping program where all of the distributed cigarettes contain a counterfeit-proof stamp. Each pack is stamped before it's distributed out to a retail site. We have inspectors who go every day all around the state to retail locations, making sure that all of the product sold is tax paid and not counterfeit. In the vaping space, there is currently no stamp. It becomes very difficult to see at retail what's a legitimate product for the consumer and for our own inspectors. The governor's asked us to look into whether we can create a stamping program similar to the one we have for cigarettes for e-cigarettes, which should substantially allow us to substantially increase our enforcement efforts and allow consumers to make sure that they're buying a non-counterfeit product.
And Mark, just anything you want to amplify that fill in the blanks from a public health perspective?
Yes, Governor. So immediately this executive order directs the Department of Public Health to put at least $20 million of funding in a public awareness campaign that targets youth and families. And really this is, as we said, this is one piece of that, but it is really going to build upon what is the Department of Public Health's nationally recognized tobacco control and awareness campaign infrastructure that we will build on. And in the next few weeks, the public should see a swell of ads and campaigns that really target schools and families, parents, and children directly about the risks of vaping, not just tobacco, but cannabis as well. And then the fact that we are learning, and this collection of at least 60 people who have a pretty dramatic lung disease as a result of their vaping activities, both tobacco and cannabis, that we are learning what the consequences are of vaping. And as the governor identified, in a decade where we saw a serious decrease in tobacco cigarette use, we are now seeing this incredible increase of vaping on campuses all throughout the state. And this is our accelerated effort to increase that public awareness campaign. Secondly, the executive order directs the Department of Public Health to spend the next 30 days looking at what other strategies around warning labels and other aspects of investigation, and frankly, what is our public health authority around what is an emerging public health crisis in our state, and what is it that we can deliver to the governor as tools that we might be able to use as we get in front of this issue, lead, as the governor said, among a handful of states that have come out today to really drive home the point that this has been sort of sneaking up on us for a number of years and months, and this collection of illnesses in our hospitals and in our RCUs and the deaths that are related are a serious warning sign that we have to be vigilant and on top of the industry that is targeting youth and families.
Governor, a couple of the other parts of the EO are somewhat exploratory, asking for the administration's authority and recommendations. So if you feel so strongly about a flavor ban, why not include an exploratory component in the EO asking what the authority is of the administration?
I already have it. I already have that.
You have what?
I already have explored that.
So you're saying from what you know, you cannot take an executive action to ban all flavors.
That's correct.
Can you speak to what logic is generally used going into this issue? We think about the issue of smoking. Is it something, and vaping, is it something where the taxes need to be enough to help recoup the damages to the state? Is it more a issue, this is bad for people, so that it really needs to stop? Can you kind of talk about your theoretical approach to this?
Well, smoking, simply put, kills people. There's no medical benefits. It's one of the most destructive things that's ever been manipulated on not only American people, but people all across the rest of the world. It's insidious. And we were making progress. We were winning the war against tobacco. People, in fact, were concerned that the tobacco taxes were not only having their intended effect, but as a consequence, a byproduct, that tax revenue was declining at such a rate that we would have to find other ways to support efforts that were funded directly from those tobacco taxes. Now we're seeing something radically different that's happened just in the last few years, and that is a huge now increase in the use, the abuse, because of these vaping technologies and these e-liquids, particularly those that are directly targeted at youth. Let's just dispense with any niceties. You don't have bubblegum flavored, mango flavored tobacco products unless you're trying to target an audience that you were losing. That's young people. It's really unconscionable. Folks that are producing those products, they sleep at night knowing what they're doing to destroy the health of a generation. And so to the extent that advertising, in some cases, can work, to the extent taxes can be a deterrent, particularly for kids that are more price sensitive, I think both advertising and taxes should be on the table.
Senator Hill's bill ban, or the tobacco ban, his bill to ban it because of the carve out for the hookah industry. Is that, I mean, do you, if you're, I guess, the push to ban flavored tobacco products, is that also fall under?
I think what tends to happen, so often the case, you try to solve for everything and you get nothing done. I mean, hookah's not the problem in classrooms. So let us solve for the flavored tobacco products. We can address the hookah issue separate and above, but these are stale arguments, and really applaud Senator Hill for his leadership on this. It's a 2-year bill, and I hope this helps in his efforts to get that bill over the
Governor,
line.
there's a
I'm
track.
sorry, right,
go
one
ahead.
second. Yeah, sorry, guys.
You're a parent, you have young kids. What would you say to parents of teenagers, and if you could project ahead to what you would say to your own kids about, I think a lot of parents and kids think they're just having fun.
Yeah, there's nothing fun, there's nothing cute about this. Literally, people are losing their lives. They're not just ending up in the emergency rooms, temporary issues, they're getting permanent respiratory issues. The magnitude of what we've unleashed on the American public is yet to be determined. If I were those parents, I would learn about this issue and take it as a top concern for the health of my children. I would make sure that my schools are doing more to do the same. And I would encourage not only the efforts today of this executive order, but I would encourage those parents to be part of an army of support to help the legislature do what it needs to do and help the president and Congress do what they already should have done, and that's ban these products.
Governor, there's already a,
Oh, sorry, I promised him, forgive me.
thanks.
Yeah.
So there is a track and trace system in place for cannabis products, but it's been very slow to roll out. You have to have an annual permit. This is for growing, but also any products, right, are supposed to be tracked, this track and trace system. But it's been very slow to roll out, and most permits as of right now are either temporary or in that kind of limbo stage. So is there a push to try to ensure that this gets rolled out quicker? What's being done to make sure that this track and trace system is
I think we've made a lot of progress in the last 4, 5, 6 months.
Can you quantify that at all?
Yeah, I could quantify that, and Nick's going to do that for me.
Okay.
But a lot of progress has been made last few months. I haven't been here 9 years. I've been here 9 months. And I'm trying to do my best to deal with a lot of issues, including this issue. Brought in Nikki Elliott to be a point person in the administration to address these issues and to navigate between all of these disparate agencies on the licensing, both permanent, temporary, and these provisional licenses that are out there. You saw the budget. This is tangible. Take a look at our budget and the number of FTEs, full-time equivalent positions that we were successful in investing in. Those positions are being hired up. You saw the 2 enforcement actions of this weekend, which were not insignificant. You saw what we did with weed maps. You're seeing a number of things happen on the enforcement side and on the licensing side. Nick will talk more about how much more successful they've been in the last few months than in the previous year.
So I don't have the most recent stats, but as of about a week ago, I think we were well over half the cannabis market is now in track and trace. And I understand from Bureau of Cannabis Control that by the end of next month, we should have about everybody into track and trace. So there's been a huge increase under the new administration in terms of sales in track and trace.
When you say everyone, do you mean everyone, even if they have a temporary or provisional permit, or
I
just
believe
annual?
that even the provisional permits that they're giving out within 30 days have to be in track and trace. I believe that's the new new standard.
And you said next month they expect to have everyone in?
I think that's right.
And we'll follow that. Look, I'll just repeat what I said on ad nauseum occasions, because it needs to be repeated. We're going from something old to something new. This doesn't happen overnight. It's the largest cannabis market anywhere in the world. And what we're doing is an extraordinary transition that is challenging. And we knew that. I said it during the campaign. I said it last few times I was standing at this podium. It's a 5 to 7 years process to transition from going something old to something new. I said it the night of the election. I said cannabis legalization is not an act, I said, that occurred this evening, election night. It's a process that will unfold over the course of many, many years. And so this is part of that process. On this topic.
Just to clarify on the flavored tobacco, or the flavored e-cigarettes, are you asking the legislature to send you a bill that bans flavored
I would like to
e-cigarettes?
see, I'd like to see that bill on my desk. I would like to sign a bill to eliminate the legal use of flavored e-cigarettes. Absolutely. And I'm hopeful that that will be accomplished in this 2-year session.
Were you engaged with the lawmakers who carried bill, like Senator Hill or Assemblyman Gray had a bill on that?
I mean, there are quite literally 1,000 moving pieces, and to the extent that I've been deeply involved in the space, cannabis and vaping, we, as an administration, I mean, my gosh, his record on this is rather prolific, down not only in San Francisco but in Los Angeles. And to the extent we have to use more muscle next year, we'll get to those issues. I think we accomplished an extraordinary amount this legislature season. I can't do everything, and let's accomplish this in the next legislative session.
And just to follow up on the weed maps question, why not push weed maps to drop all those illegal retail ads before the end of the year? Why not push
They're
them to
doing
do
it in real time. They have a legal responsibility to get it done by the end of the year, but every day they better be dropping folks, and we've been monitoring that. So this is a day-to-day occurrence, and we want to see everybody off that platform.
On another health-related
That's good that you connected health, which I appreciate. But before we segue, anybody else on this topic, to the extent some of you may need to get out of here, happy to let you go. Perfect.
Can you explain why, after saying you would sign SB 276, you then changed your mind and wanted more amendments?
Because I worked with the administration to figure out the details of the implementation and felt that we needed to clarify some additional points to help with the implementation.
So you didn't fully understand that before when you said you would sign the bill?
No, that's the process of legislation, as you know, is complex. And there are a series of amendments on dozens and dozens of bills that work their way through a process. I was engaged in looking at the process with detail, a view of how it's implemented. That's my role and responsibility, and there were a few tweaks that needed to be made, and those subsequent 5 amendments I thought were appropriate.
And what do you say then to the criticism that we've heard last week that the waffling, if you want to call it, or changes on
I
this...
don't want to call it that.
Or the changes that the late changes that you sought on this issue did give a platform to the very large protests in the Capitol and around the Capitol that led to the menstrual blood being thrown the other night.
Respectfully, I try to treat people of all crosses of life respectfully and honorably, and I don't condone, never have in my entire life or career, violent acts, and certainly did not condone what occurred the other night. But to suggest that in a position where I'm responsible for the implementation, for the administration of a law, that I should reduce any consideration or further consideration as to its effects on a particular date before it lands on my desk is a novel thing, because I do not believe that I would be criticized or even critiqued for considering the same on a myriad of other issues, of which we do often here in this building. And so, as someone who's responsible for its administration, tightening up administration to make sure it's effective, I was very pleased with the amendment.
Did you give any directive to the sergeants or the CHP to not remove or
I did not
disrupt the protest?
personally give any direction, and let me just say this, as a broad value statement, my gosh, I'm protested for a living. You should join me. Come to my house, come to press conferences all across the state. I don't want to see anyone arrested. People have the right to express themselves unless they cross that line. That line was clearly crossed in the Senate chambers. But people have the right to express themselves, and for me to start directing that people be arrested, my gosh, you would rightfully be critical of that. If I start sending out the police and a small army of people because I don't like what people are saying about me, those protests weren't directed just upstairs. They were very directed towards me. I can take that, but when you cross the line, you got to be held accountable.
Governor,
Is there anyone in your administration who takes an anti-vaccine position?
I'm not aware of many, or any.
there's nobody?
There's currently, my estimate is there are 220,000 people in the administration. So,
Let's
no,
say
but
in
let me,
your
if I may, based on that estimate, I want to condition that perhaps there are a few.
In your leadership
but
team?
None that I'm aware of in my leadership team.
Do you guys, but you've had regular meetings with opponents of the anti-vaccine
I
bill?
think very high-profile meetings with people on all sides of this issue, and I think that's appropriate on legislation. I don't know. Maybe in this day and age. It's
Governor, protesters obviously were trying to appeal.
How your role as a father impacts your thinking on legislation. I'm wondering if you can speak to like the extent to which that was a factor in these amendments that you asked for on the vaccine bill.
Everything's a factor. I mean, my life's experiences are a factor. I support the vaccines. I supported the vaccine bill. I strengthened it. I made sure that it was successful in its implementation. And that's profoundly important. My job is not abstract. It's not ideological. It's the application of the rules that we set forth in this body. And I need to look at the implementation in a very sober and reflective way. And we do so on a myriad of issues. And we ask for amendments on a myriad of issues. In fact, I think we've been perhaps the most proactive administration in some time, engaging the legislature in the front end to address concerns. That's why we were successful in the police use of force bill. That's why we were successful in a charter school deal. That's why we're successful in a rent deal. That's why we were successful in this budget process and paying down pensions and debt. That's why we were successful in doing things that many of you in this room said simply would not get done, particularly on the utility bill, because we engage on the front end. It's my approach. That's, I think, the job of the executive. I'm not a member of the legislature. I'm a member of the executive branch, and my job is to try to lead, strike deals, see what can be done, and then address the concerns around the application of our ideals. And that's the job I had as mayor of San Francisco. As an executive, it's the job I've had as a private sector executive in my businesses. It's a very different mindset when you're responsible for implementation. And I think that is a very, positive thing to consider when you're before you sign legislation.
Vaccine exemptions, I'm wondering, is that an issue your family has had to deal with at all?
No.
Do any of your kids have exemptions, or any
Nope.
kids who are close to you?
Nope.
Governor, do you have a message to President Trump, who's arriving in California tomorrow? Anything at all?
Well, I hope he moves forward this ban on flavored tobacco products and e-liquids and vaping products. I hope he comes here with an open mind and reads the letter that the big 13 cities, the League of Counties and the League of Cities just sent the administration, encouraging him to support our efforts to address homelessness, of which we have done more in this legislative session than we have in previous years to address. I hope you'll take very seriously our call for 50,000 housing vouchers, VASH vouchers for homeless, and Section 8 housing vouchers. And I hope you consider perhaps the most important part of that request, and that is to do rent modifications based upon cost of living, which is the biggest challenge the state faces as it relates to the existing allocation of vouchers. So we wrote a letter that's a bit unprecedented to a president days before his arrival, and that is detailing requests, not with a clenched fist, but an open hand.
Really,
I'm sorry.
Governor, in terms of your commutations that you granted last week, we've heard some backlash from some of these victims' families. Anything that you'd like to say to them?
God bless the victims. And I'm trying to do more on victim compensation funds. I'm reforming how we administer those funds, looking at our Office of Planning Research, their role, and the Office of Emergency Service and their role. And so we're working through some administrative changes, looking to make sure we have appropriate revenue in that fund. As you know, I increased the number of awards or rewards related to open cases in order to help advance the concerns of victims and law enforcement. These are not easy decisions. It's quite literally about one's freedom. These are life and death decisions in some cases. And they're not novel. Governor Brown did an enormous amount on commutations to raise the bar and in a belief that people deserve second chances as long as they're being held to account. It's not being soft. This is not about negating or excusing, but there's a certain point when someone gets an 80-year sentence and others get a 10-year sentence. You have to square those things, you balance those things, a certain point where you make a consideration that sometimes these sentences are excessive, and in many cases, I believe that was the case.
Governor, we're hearing that a veto of SB 1 is imminent or could be happening. Your thoughts on why you would reject that bill?
A solution in search of a problem. As many of you know, you've chronicled this. I'll take a backseat to no one in my opposition to the Trump administration's rollbacks on our clean air and clean water, endangered species. I think I've been at this podium with the Attorney General, a number of cases where we've advanced lawsuits. As you know, my administration on more than half a dozen specific instances has used administrative authority to address some of those rollbacks, which is afforded not only me but my agencies. So this bill wouldn't advance any of those efforts. In fact, it would only hamstrung one of the efforts that we've been underway, or we're engaged in. It's been underway for over 10 months, 11 months since the election night, and that's on these voluntary settlement agreements. I've been working my tail off on this. People of goodwill on all sides have been willing to sit around the table, the environmental community and water interests in the state. We're very close to calling that question. This would have put that entire process at peril. And I was not willing to do that, not when we're this close, and not when all that work was put in. So, number one, it's unnecessary. Number two, it would have set back our ability to advance an effort to get out of this litigious mindset where everybody's getting nothing except more and more frustrated. And that's why I felt it was appropriate.
How would it derail the voluntary agreements? Because basically the law said they were going to take existing federal law. This is not new law on endangered species protection.
Voluntary agreements are about compromise, give and take, about flexibility, about good people, goodwill coming together. We can, there's two courses here. We can go back into our bunkers and we can litigate for decades. We've been litigating for decades. We can be further and further divided, or we can start to work more collaborative together. People of goodwill have been working together on this. I think I've shown a commitment on the Delta Tunnel issue, on a water portfolio, which also would have been impacted potentially by this conversation. We need some flexibility to continue to engage, keep people at the table. And those aren't just my words and concerns. Those were expressed by a myriad of people, from LA Met to other elected officials that are part of this process, and I just feel very strongly in this process. Let me just also make a point. on Cadiz, on the biological opinions of the Trump administration, on details of the Endangered Species Act, on the gray wolf, I mean, I could go down a list of things we have done to push back against this administration. If I had not done any of those things or even expressed a desire in the space, I would understand why this quote-unquote insurance policy would be needed. But under the circumstances, when we've led on all of those things, it's unnecessary. I was very clear of my concerns.
So she pushed ahead knowing that you had no intention.
I think there were how many vetoes, Governor Brown, last year? A couple hundred? I imagine people knowingly went ahead to land things on Governor Brown's desk that he was going to veto. It's the nature of the process. Much ado about nothing.
But it's a little bit different for you. You have really put yourself forward as the check on the Trump administration, especially in this area.
Exactly, and will continue to, and I appreciate that acknowledgement, which only reinforces why this was unnecessary.
So, Governor, with President Trump arriving in California later today, can you explain how California has become the leading opposition state to the Trump administration? And with its follow-up, President Trump has indicated he'll fight you on the turf, immigration, taxes, environmental policy. What makes you think?
Well, because we are winning. The vast majority of the lawsuits been adjudicated in favor of California. We're the most un-Trump state in the United States of America. And we're going to protect and preserve our values as it relates to clean air, clean waters, clean cars, of which we're advancing aggressive pushback against the Trump administration's desire to roll back vehicle emission standards, tailpipe emissions standards that have long been afforded this state under the Clean Air Act. We'll continue to protect the most vulnerable Californians, immigrants, refugees. We'll continue to do what we can to push back against the privatization of incarceration. We'll continue to lead and continue to do so from a position of strength. And this is the final point. California is not a small, isolated state. There's no reason to navel gaze in California. It's a $3 trillion a year economy. It's running record surpluses. Trump administration's running record deficits. We have record low unemployment, 114 consecutive months of net job growth, a record for the state of California. Our GDP has significantly outperformed the Trump administration and the rest of the federal government over the last 5 years. California is succeeding as we protect and preserve our values, as we reduce our energy consumption, and we continue to decarbonize and detoxify our clean air and clean water.
Do you think the state's clean vehicle rebate program should be restricted to send the rebates only to those car makers who enter your agreement?
I will say only this, stay tuned, give me a few days, and you'll get a very specific answer to that question.
Governor, did the departure, the resignation of Jennifer Kent have anything to do with that Facebook post criticizing the vaccination protesters?
We're putting together a new team in the administration. It's a whole new team of folks coming in, new DPH director. It's coming in under Mark Galley, many others. So we're building that team out. By the way, Jennifer Kent's been extraordinary.
Did her resignation have anything to do with the post?
She's incredible. I'll finish. She's an incredibly talented person, and you'd have to ask her why she resigned.
Did you get a chance to look at AB 235, the bill by Senator Mays about teaching on the merits of that?
Yeah, I haven't, look, I've got 716 pieces of legislation that are on my desk. I haven't even assessed the ones that haven't gotten to my desk. I've got 28 days to sign or veto these bills. I've been proactively engaged in many of them, and I mentioned just a few of them a moment ago. Many of them I haven't had the luxury and ability, the bandwidth to get as engaged as perhaps I wished. We have not been passive as administration, and many of these bills are landing on my desk in a way that likely will get my support and signature, which is encouraging. And so I'm hopeful that when all of this is assessed, that we will have one of the most successful legislative sessions in modern memory.
Governor, anything else right now you know you're going to veto that you want to tell us about?
Nothing at the moment.
Governor, protesters were clearly targeting the First partner.
I'm sorry?
Governor, the protesters were clearly targeting the first partner
Okay.
for the vaccine bill in
Yeah.
hopes of appealing to her that she would appeal to you to veto it. And I'm just curious, can you talk about what her involvement was in the vaccine bill and whether she
No.
had opinions on it?
Yeah, everyone has opinions. I'll leave it at that. I did what I needed to do to make it more successful and to make sure we implement it in an effective way. And I'm proud that I signed the bill. I support vaccines, long have, and I feel like these amendments are going to make this a stronger bill.
How do you respond to concerns in the legislature that your word can't be trusted when you said you would vote for the bill and then went back on that?
Well, I imagine that's the case with dozens of pieces of legislation. People say, I think we've got it done, and then the last minute you see changes. I think it was one of the reasons that the initiative on the 72 hours came to the fore is because people were making last minute changes across the board. I think AB 5, there were last minute changes. People felt strongly that this was it, and then there were some subsequent changes. It's the nature of the deliberative process. And the extent that we've got a good working relationship with the legislature, it's been extraordinary, and I think it's demonstrable in the success of this legislative session.
So you don't think this issue affects your relationship with
Absolutely
the
not. Absolutely not.
Do
Yeah.
Do you sympathize with the views, some of the views of those?
Guys,
protesters?
I appreciate you guys. This is, but you know, I signed the bill, I signed it, and I was happy to sign it, and we've got 716 things pending on my desk.
So, do you plan to sign Nancy Skinner's bill allowing student
We'll
athletes?
take a good look, and as you looked at my record as Lieutenant Governor on the issue of athleticism, what was happening at UC Berkeley, being a student athlete myself, I have very strong opinions on this subject, and you'll be hearing more about that in the next few days.
Governor, on the issue of data privacy,
What's that?
So for it, when are you planning to sign it? What is the status of your talks with companies about
Yeah, we'll let you know more about the status of those talks, but they're ongoing. I'm committed. I commit to engaging folks, see if we can find some common ground. I appreciate the legislature keeping an open mind up until the end on their amendments. I think one of them helped you guys in your industry, even though that was a last-minute change, and it surprised a lot of people. But I think that's a healthy process, and I think people should be open to argument, interested in evidence, and engaged on a myriad of topics. And I think best public policy comes from that mindset, not an ideological mindset. And so on the issue of AB 5, like so many issues the state faces, one should keep an open argument. One should be respectful to different points of view. You can hold our strong personal beliefs, professional beliefs, but still reach out to those that disagree with us. In the spirit of AB 5, there were many amendments that I think were done in that light, and I think that's an encouraging thing.
do you think AB 5 is just the beginning for labor unions making gains in the private sector?
Well, AB 5 alone doesn't allow for organization, and that's where it's limited. It allows for appropriate compensation for people that have earned it, to allow their status to afford them workers' comp benefits, unemployment insurance benefits, potential retirement benefits that come with that status. But they don't afford organizing privileges that are not spelled out by federal statute. California, however, can advance those efforts, but it requires subsequent legislative efforts, and that's why I've been engaged with labor and some of the tech sector to see if there is a pathway to help advance further organization of these platforms. I think that would be a healthy thing.
So you
Governor-
want the more ability to
Well, that's why I've been engaged in negotiations explicitly to provide an opportunity and pathway to do just that.
Governor, can you comment, Ben Carson might come to San Francisco tomorrow too. Under his leadership of HUD, how have you seen, or have you seen any like public support for public housing and homelessness?
So in an effort to not start his trip with him responding to a quote from me, attacking him, let me just say the following. I would hope that Ben Carson would read our letter, this unprecedented letter by CSAC, League of Cities, by 13 mayors representing the political and geographic diversity of the state. And I will remind you the 13 mayors are not all Democrats, and that Mr. Carson would consider the core request, which is very much directed to him, not just the president, and that's on the issue of housing vouchers. That is under the auspices of HUD, Section 8 housing vouchers in particular, and then more broadly these VASH vouchers, of which I know Secretary Carson is familiar with. The issues of rent and costs of living are something as well that Mr. Carson's very, very familiar with, and I hope he would consider those fair market value issues, fair market rent issues as well. They can make the administrative act in real time. If he wants to immediately address the crisis, take us up on that letter. They can do it administratively, and then they can support H.R. 1856, PolitiFact me on that, which is Maxine Waters' bill, which would afford 300,000 housing vouchers nationwide. I think that's also a good bill. But the President of the United States and Secretary Carson have the ability to do something real in real time. I'll close by making one final point on this. When you looked at the last number of homeless in the state, 129 plus thousand, when you break it down, those 50,000 housing vouchers that we're requesting can eliminate all veteran that are out on the streets and sidewalks, can eliminate all those that are quote-unquote chronically homeless in the state of California, and make a substantial dent at eliminating family homelessness. So the President and Secretary Carson have the ability to this week, by administrative fiat, to eliminate veteran homelessness in the state, eliminate chronic homelessness in the state, and family homelessness substantially with those 50,000 vouchers. That's a pretty remarkable opportunity if they're sincere in their desires. If they're insincere, and this is, God forbid, about something else, politics, not good policy, then they'll reject it outright, and I hope that's not the case.
Last question.
Oh my God, you guys winning a Pulitzer on the fact that I signed a vaccine bill. Enough.
What was the extent of the first partner's involvement?
Guys, I made amendments to administratively strengthen the bill. It's a stronger bill because of what we did. And I'm proud of the fact that I listened to my administration, I listened to folks on all sides of this debate, and I supported the vaccination bill because I felt that it can be implemented in an effective manner. And forgive me, sincerely, for reading the bill. And sometimes I have to ask myself, do people read things? It's, you guys are consumed by personality. No, let me say it. Personality and process. I'm not as consumed by personality and process. The outcome is a very favorable outcome. We will address the legitimate health needs of these vaccinations that were being sold, and we will address the concerns that Dr. Pan and others have advanced, and I think we'll do it in a much more effective way because of the amendments.
There was a bill that made to the governor just last year that would have allowed bars to close later. It failed this year. Did you or your administration intervene at all, ask legislators not to send that?
I did not ask any legislator not to send that.
On data privacy, California has this landmark law. Now there's an effort, in Washington to get a federal law that could preempt our
Sorry, you guys
our
have
law
to stand
here.
for all this.
And the Business Roundtable
It's awkward,
now,
I imagine, right? Sorry.
the California Business Roundtable is asking Congress to write a national data privacy law. Are you supporting or
I
opposing
hope
that
they would.
effort?
I think California's privacy law should be replicated across the country. It's a point of pride. I think it should become a national standard, and I'm really pleased with the leadership in the state and this building for the work they did on that bill.
But what about a federal law that would preempt ours? That wouldn't
Well,
be
federal law that lowers the protections would be a mistake. And I think they should take, like so many things California does, they should start with what we did as a baseline and make it even more comprehensive. I think this is the beginning of a process that will unfold over the course of the next few years federally that California rightfully is leading, and I'm just pleased with the advocacy. If you want to get involved in personality and politics, full disclosure, I've known Alistair McTaggart for decades. Worked with him when he was doing real estate in San Francisco. He's a formidable individual, and he deserves an outsized amount of credit. And so do a number of legislative leaders from Bob Hertzberg on down that worked their tail off to get that to Governor Brown's desk, and applaud the governor for signing that bill.
So will you oppose this effort?
Thank you all very much. We're 30 minutes over.
All right.
Thank you for speaking.
All right. This is yours, sir.